We are coming in from deep in August. Another off the record on the rocks with my good friend Mr. Ankarina Laura. It's been crazy. We've been staying on it in August. Typically, we take a little slow time at the beginning of the summer. We kind of ease our way back in, as we've covered in the last couple of episodes. Though it has not been slowing down. Not here in DC. Not in the dictatorial overtake of Washington and Chicago coming next. But not to be outdone, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce announcing their engagement this week, stealing headlines, good and evil, light and dark, like K-pop demon hunters taking over the narrative of what is good and bad and what do we stand for. All the while, Trump is walking South Korea through the White House, having lunch with Putin in Alaska. I mean, I don't know what to make of it. Ethereum's hitting all-time highs and then dumping. I feel like you got to pay attention in these dog days of summer to get a deal as we head back to school.
Ooh, you touched a perfect opener. I mean, the truth is, cheers, by the way, it's great to see you. The truth is, everything you just said is about that pull and push and tug of the good and the evil. I mean, the K-pop demon hunter point there is a great one. Just went to the sing-along in the theaters. This August that everyone is supposed to be on vacation has felt like the busiest work-from-home August from a federal government standpoint that I think we've ever seen, state government standpoint. I look at all those things you just mentioned and how carefully each one of those news points needed to be curated in their calendar, the schedule of things, right? You can't have one overshadowing the other. They have to fall like dominoes. I'm sure the negotiation of the Swift and Kelsey's to not announce at a time when we're in Wyoming talking about Fed rates, or at least like vaguely referring to federal, interest rates. I'm sure they can't announce an engagement once the NFL season starts. I'm sure that they can't,
Small.
Grab a drink. It's time for another episode of Off the Record on the Rocks. Join Michael Toner and Ankarina Laura as we discuss the latest in all things Web3, AI, metaverse, and crypto. Tune out the noise and turn up the signal as we pour ourselves into the future. Better make mine a double.
Announce an engagement when the president of the United States, has been filmed and with things being released of just marching and wanting to validate actions by saying, well, we did a poll and the poll numbers suggest that most of America wants me to act like this and to do this, just to be backing up the most insane ideas with data. Because this is the thing that it gets back, I think, to maybe the underpinnings of the whole reason why we started this show is that we're following threads of data points that are signals in noise. It is in AI, it is in blockchain, it is in the metaverse, it's in this whole new world of digital, which now feels like is completely inseparable from the government and politics. This is intertwined. Even content now that we know is fake can still be used even though it is fake. So as long as you call it fake, I feel like now we're treading into this little area, as you just described, where data can be manufactured to support literally any decision and to justify anything. And here I thought, gosh, we had moved on from the days of calling weapons of mass destruction out in foreign countries and then in full on invading them. I feel like we're actually veering back dangerously to a place where we can justify decisions that are 100% in our interest only, and do that by just basically saying, well, AI told us that they generated a data set and this is what we have to do. These are the points we have to tackle. And the good and evil is blurring. It's just blurring in a bad way for me.
I agree with you. The blurring of it's hard to tell what's good and evil. And it does make me think of these archetypal Batman stories, the difference between good and light, and the gray area sometimes between them becomes difficult to see, because you stopping crime, that's a good thing. Lowering interest rates, that's a good thing. But if you are going to use data and then assume power over that data, and I'm talking specifically now about Trump deciding he has the authority to fire one of the Federal Reserve governors, Lisa Cook. So he couldn't get Jerome Powell out. He doesn't have the authority, but he has the data backing him saying, well, interest rates should be lowered. They should be lowering these. And he's making that case with the job numbers. which are now being manufactured with his now unfurled banner outside the Department of Labor. If you don't like the data, go get new data. And these dominoes that you're describing of at every path you go down the next layer, they're standing up new institutions and new data to back up and justify the firing of a Federal Reserve chair so that he can get the lower interest rate. And guess what? When the president of the United States essentially says you're fired, you're fired, whether he has the authority or not, right? The data, people actually want me to act this way. Think about all of the psychology and everything that is now in motion.
Well, and not just that, the psychology in motion is, there was a time when someone came down to your office and there'd be a knock, and then you'd open the door and say, "Hey, do you have a few minutes?" And you come in and the person sits down and says, "Look, Michael, this just isn't working out, and you fired." And now there is a friend of yours who texts you and says, "Hey, did you see the post on this social media outlet that says you've been fired?" I'm like, "Wait, what?" "Well, here, I'll send it to you. What's the timestamp?" I mean, they're just talk about, one thing for our listeners on the show, we talk about is trying to find the truth layer. And the metaphor there is in the blockchain, right? There's layer one. There are layer two apps. There are these different layers of the blockchain. There's going to be a privacy layer. Some blockchains are already working on this and figuring out ways to manage that across blockchains, which by definition are transparent and can't be obfuscated. But there's somewhere underneath it is a truth layer, because I kind of play out the thought exercise to its insane end, which is, hey, you just got fired in a tweet, but by who? By President of the United States. But you have a job that is not governed by President of the United States. Therefore, you aren't fired, but because of the way that this new world kind of compresses down data into what will eventually become a truth layer, we're now seeing, like we talked about, I think this now goes back even a year when we were talking about the insanity of like aliens and sharks and Chinese spy balloons in August, is there is the actual truth, which perhaps we'll never, ever know again. Let's just think about that as a thought exercise. We may never know what that means again. And then there is what we're being told over here. You could call it propaganda. You could call it just noise. Somewhere in the middle is actually the reality that we all agree is the truth. But we're getting to a point where, and I hate to use this word, we're getting to a point where there is a consensus mechanism for defining truth, because the propaganda on one end has to come in and do a little Byzantine general handshake with the actual truth. And when we find where it is that consensus happens, that's our reality. And right now, there's a pretty good chance Cook won't have a job. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be next week, but there's, if the group think, the consensus says, well, we need to, this is now real, you are going to have to leave your job as a governor of the Federal Reserve, then that will have in effect made that Truth Social post the truth, even though it never was to begin with. I'm not sure if I'm describing that well enough, but I feel like there's something there. I feel like we're blockchaining our way into defining a new version of reality for not only Americans, but everybody in the world.
Yes, well said, all of it. And unfortunately, there's been a few times on the show where I then scream, Polymarket, put your money where your mouth is. And that consensus layer and that truth layer, the bets taken on whether Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift would get engaged in 2025. There is now a payout. There is now a target price that the consensus has been reached. The truth has been told. And now the market can settle. And
how much money did you make? I know you bet on it.
I mean, look, that is crazy. The fact that she, times her album going first, then all of this dictator rattling, saber rattling from Trump, and now this taking back of the narrative with the pop narrative, and everything we're describing will come back around maybe to the K-pop demon hunters.
Oh, we will for sure.
But it is the, social media is the mirror that we're looking into, and that's serving back to us this truth layer. And when you can manufacture social media content, and you can manufacture likes, and you can manufacture, the the thoughts, God bless. I mean, that's where it gets really crazy when you talk about social media manipulation and fake news. We used to talk about fake news. It's so much worse than that now. You can manufacture what's good, what's bad, what needs to happen next, what needs to happen in order to peel back these layers of truth. And if it gets paid out on Polymarket, and if there's a bet right now about whether or not Lisa Cook has a job or not, the market's going to settle it. And it's going to be done on the blockchain. And some people will win and some people will lose. And in this case, some people will make money and some people won't. Ugh,
Yeah, and
it's
it's
dystopian.
even it's dystopian, but it's also there's something bigger at play, and there's a lot of data points that have come in that support this. Which if you're in the business of making some money and you want to do it in a way that's disingenuous, and you want to do that on the internet, there is a plurality of ways that you can do that, and a lot of times you have to be fairly technical in order to pull that off, right? We think about these scams, whether they're technically driven or socially engineered or what have you. But when you start to think about this notion of ideas that can be created, whether you call it fake news, I mean, it reminds me actually of going all the way back to the original administration, the first Trump administration. There was the woman whose name, I can't believe the name, I was blanking on it. She's this blonde lady whose name was, who was not Caroline. She was someone who was always hanging around the Oval Office and had this job as like a special counselor. I'll remember her name in a second. But she was the one who first came out and said, this is not about fake news. This was for clarification. Or rather, fake news was always what the Dems were doing. So that was the thing. But the clarification was there is a version of the truth. There are many versions of the truth. I think were the exact quote that was being thrown around. And when we play it now forward, I don't think I really appreciated that comment at the time. I was sort of thinking about that as the rebuttal to fake news, that like, well, sometimes there's a different way of looking at something, was I think how she was trying to articulate it. But when we bring it to today, and you talked about this idea of it's like testing ideas. Sometimes in the manufacture of news, in this new world, you can test 4 or 5 different versions of the story. And that can be done in social media. It can be done on broadcast media. It can be done on radio. You can do it through polling. There's now all these different ways to test what we're going to do or what we already have done. And how do we describe what we have done? How do we change the name of something to make it have a cute rhyming marketing name? How do we reposition, crime going down on the streets versus saying a full declaration of martial law and income federal troops? There's many different ways of describing the same thing. And now, whether it's a Polymarket driven thing, because everybody wants to make money or not, there is the absolute practice of just floating different version of news, seeing what hits. Not unlike the way a product marketer at any normal company in the United States, a private company, would float an A/B test or an ABC test on how do we market our new car, our new telco, our new video game, etc., and then find the one that hits and then just triple down on it as hard as you can, and then go to Polymarket and quadruple down on it. And I think we're now seeing that. You can spin literally everything. Remember, this is a sitting president who said out loud on national television, I could go downtown in Manhattan and I could shoot someone in the middle of the street and not go to jail. And it's chilling because now let's just take that back to all the things that are happening in the world of AI and the world of crypto right now, and how there is, and finally people are saying it, not to hit the switch gears too hard, but the word manipulation is now finally being used when talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, even the Federal Reserve. The manipulation, that's the key word. Manipulate the news, the image, the broadcast, the value, the economy, the country. Manipulate it all and do it in plain sight.
Kellyanne Conway, that
was her name.
Yes, in a generative AI world, when you can manufacture and test in real time with real live feedback, it's more than social listening. It's now social predictive marketing. It's using the inputs of social media to predict the next thing and then serve it back to them exactly how you need the narrative to shape up. I just thought of another like through thread in there, and then it went out one eye and out the other. But yeah, I think.
Well, I'll take you back to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So in the old days, they'll go to Wyoming in August, and the government is shut down. And I say the old days, meaning literally last year and every year before that since they've been doing this. Those are the old days. These are the new days. And, the chairman, would come out, in this case, Powell would come out and talk to his friends after they went fly fishing on the Snake River and having a nice steak dinner and wearing cowboy boots and doing the whole thing, right? It's really nice, very relaxing, fresh air, clear your head before we go back to our desks, back to the cities, back to deciding an economic roadmap and plan for the largest economy in the world, right? It's real heady, this group of people out there in Wyoming. Now, let's fast forward to this year, or just rewind by a few days. Nothing explicit was said. Everything was implicit. And when you're in the business of running these economies, kind of the number one thing that everyone counts on you for, the Wall Street guys, every other exchange in the world, people in Hong Kong are watching, people in the Nisei are watching in Japan, in Europe, everyone's watching. And the chairman would come up and say, yes, we're committing to a reduction of a full point, and we're done in a half point on a schedule, followed by a quarter point, giving a clear roadmap to markets. Then all the markets can start to adjust, from the mortgage brokers, for better or for worse, to, imports and exports and on down the line until you get back down to us in our homes and what that means. Now, it actually is a person getting on a stage at a podium is insinuating something, just suggesting that there could be, all these nice words, there should be a future correction, and we might address by this. And it shouldn't be lost on our listeners that at the same week that the chairman of the Federal Reserve was not providing any specific information, the Polymarket world was starting to thin slice all of his language. All that prose was being thin sliced and people making assumptions. And as soon as the assumption fit the need of, oh, this is positive, therefore I'm going to this, and all the while rolling out a stable coin in Wyoming, the Wyoming government rolling out a stable coin, which is completely the antithesis, if we really want to be honest, about what the Federal Reserve does as a Federal Reserve. But yet it almost felt like Powell was there kind of making sure he got his piece and his information in on the stablecoin business. That was more important than actually giving any proper directive to anybody about global financial markets.
Look,
help me figure this one out, because it felt like it was a big nothing burger.
Wyoming stablecoin. That was the through thread of exactly where I was going to go a moment ago. But the other through thread to tie them all together is what you were going with the grift in the open right now, saying what you're going to do, projecting the fake news, and then waiting for the roulette wheel to spin until you can put your finger down on it, and then cash in on exactly what you knew the outcome was going to be the whole time. And that grift out in the open, coupled with the stablecoin, I'll come back to it here, is the sovereign wealth fund and the U.S. investments in Intel and the dealing happening in back doors around NVIDIA and chips and who you buy them from and who gets paid when those chips are moved and bought and sold. And the U.S. didn't used to put its finger on that wheel, at least not as in the open as it is being discussed now. And I think the stablecoin piece of it, especially coming from Wyoming, is the antithesis to Cynthia Loomis and all of the regulation that is now causing and allowing for this deregulated market to flourish. And I think it is the night and day. It is the good and evil. It is the antithesis to the thing that's actually happening, which signals to me the Fed has no control. They've lost it. It's not there. It's manufactured. It's fake. And there's not enough generative AI in the world because these old fogies don't know how to use it. They're not out there telling this story. They're not putting the grift out in the open. And that's maybe where that gray area for you and I even to struggle with of, okay, as long as I know what the rules are, as long as I know right now there aren't very many rules and regulations, and polymarkets can exist, and versions of unregulated securities are kind of okay as long as you publish a white paper and you tell people what you're doing. The SEC and their new crypto enforcement task force, making the US the crypto capital of the world, they're gonna greenlight you. You're okay. It's a changing dynamic, but the grift is out in the open if you're paying enough attention to what's happening in deep summer when maybe not everybody is.
Well, yeah, when you're caught up still like on the topless beach in the south of France and or getting your kids back to school, because back to school happens in the mid-dead of August, it's a perfect time for that. But as you're describing it, I think that you're onto something that's even bigger than I think we thought. This is only the tip of an iceberg in that the Federal Reserve is losing power. It already has lost a lot of power, but it is because if we think about the importance of what used to be when the chairman of the Federal Reserve, when Alan Greenspan would sneeze, people would say, well, Canada and Mexico would catch a fever or whatever. There was a little metaphor for that, right? There was an absolute direct correlation between the simple function. There's one big lever, right? It was just what's the percentage points that I can pull, the ticks. They even try to obfuscate that by calling it 25 points to like make normal people not even know what that represents.
Basis points all of a sudden.
Basis points. Yeah, we're moving basis points. And this lever would be pulled. And what does that effectively do? Well, it changes the cost of you going and getting money. One of my favorite CFOs had a great quote, which is, you can always go get money. It's just that some money is more expensive than other money, right? Tell me what the basis point lever is and what the maturation, chart on your spreadsheet is. And then I'll tell you whether or not that's a good way to go get that money or not. It used to be very simple. Pull the lever, make it either more expensive to borrow or make it less expensive to borrow. To borrow what? To borrow money. For what purpose? Well, generally speaking, to buy things that require you to borrow money. Like what? Like real estate and like automobiles. Those are the only, and now you're about to say something, so you go ahead and say it right now.
Well, homes and
Yes.
Sally and Freddie, they're going public, baby.
Yes, because if they go public, guess what they're not beholden to? The Federal Reserve, because these are entire industries that are manipulated, to bring that word back, by a single lever, by a single old white guy who sometimes goes to Wyoming. And if you're that single white guy who goes to Wyoming and pulls the lever, and now you're seeing, wait a second, Fannie and Freddie are going to go private. The United States people and even other people in the world can buy into that. The Department of Justice already has deals into Microsoft, into Facebook, into other large tech companies. They don't call it a government investment in equity of those companies. They just call it a deal, a big line item on someone's sales deal. Well, NVIDIA, you mentioned it, come back around. The United States is like, no, we're not doing a deal. We're just buying equity because everything that was private is public and everything that was public is private. You want to talk about blurring the truth? It used to be binary. There was a lie. 0. There is truth. A 1. Well, now you were public. 0. Private. 1. You pick it. And no one likes binary. It actually is better for business if you can operate in all the decimal points that appear between the 0 and the 1. And now we're seeing that. So with the Federal Reserve effectively being stripped of its power, just one market after another, you better damn well believe those guys are creating stablecoins in Wyoming and are realizing that borrowing money from a traditional standpoint based on the Federal Reserve's base points is like your grandfather's Oldsmobile. It's your 401k. It's the thing that will never support you going forward. Borrowing money through a federal bank or program. With cryptocurrency available to everyone, full deregulation and at the highest levels, now the Federal Reserve realizes, and again, as I'm even saying it out loud, I think that the Federal Reserve ends up not going digital. And that there is an alternative, that the Sailor Digital Federal Reserve, whatever that Bitcoin reserve is going to be, will be managed by yet another private entity that isn't related to the Federal Reserve. Because why give those guys any more power back? They've almost clawed all of it away.
Yeah, I think that will be where we start to maybe get hints as you head into September and October, and as there's more of this market frenzy. And I've been calling it for such a long time that this frenzy of IPOs and acquisitions and spinouts and market activity will create the economic cover. The money moving, the volatility then becomes the way you win and lose. And if you can predict that volatility and where you're putting your thumb on the scale and which companies are going to be allowed at the inauguration to stand on the stage and look, all the deals, all the tariff deals and all this nonsense that's continuing to go on in DC, it is 100% related to this new economy, this new world order that is being stood up, the new banking system running on the ISO 2022 standard. There will not be 5 and 7 day lags interbanking between the big banks, and even more so, this standing up of these Bitcoin treasury companies, even Trump's own World Liberty Financial and the tokenomics that he is introducing with USD1 to create his own dollar-backed stablecoin. He wants to be the bank. And I think that idea of self-sovereignty, we talk a lot about this when it comes to Bitcoin, and the education to the individual in their home with a 401k to understand the difference between what assets you own and what assets are being custodied by a bank that you are a client of. And there's a massive difference in your ability to access and move and transact and lend and borrow against those assets. The clarity for me is coming, and it's almost calming in that nothing is going to surprise me now, knock on wood, but nothing is going to surprise me. I think that we've paved a road. I see where the fuzzy is going to continue to be fuzzy, and I think there's going to be winners. And keep your eyes peeled on the sovereign wealth fund and where does the U.S. invest? And if I was picking companies alongside crypto and wanting to buy into the equities market, I know who I'd be following.
Well, and the look, just to bring it back to some real brass tacks, crypto manipulation in plain sight. You recall, I forget now how long ago it was. Was it 3 months ago that maybe it was Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr. who just had a single tweet that just said, "Buy some ETH, you'll thank me later."
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was in that range, right? And for part of the thought exercise and for the show, you and I said, okay, we're going to buy some ETH. You just told us to. Let's just see what this is all about. And as this climb to all-time high, and everyone's talking about Ethereum, and then just the volume of press and news, the saturation to the point where you couldn't go a click or two anywhere on the internet without seeing some ad or some bullet point or some news article across reputable sites that say things like, Ethereum is having its 2017 Bitcoin moment. Bitcoin bulls are, dumping and sideways moving into Ethereum, and all this propaganda pushing. And then we're at an all-time high. I don't know if it was on the black moon or whatever. I think it was on the black moon, which if anyone's following celestial events, as we do, there's something called the black moon. Look it up. And when it hit, Ethereum hit its all-time high. But like all things that hit an all-time high, they have to come down. And as we talked, as things come down, that's when whales or people who have lots of crypto or governments get a memo, get a call, get a note saying, hey, everybody, sell off, make some profits, and then we'll let you know when to buy back in. Because there's enough people in enough positions of power running entire government treasuries that they can make buys and sells that influence the up and the down of these markets in a way that you could literally never do on Wall Street. Wall Street has, after many, many decades of people trying to jimmy rig it, created all kinds of rails and boundaries and rules about what you can and can't do. And people go to jail for real for trying to play around with that, to monkey with that. Now, you may not go to jail as a senator or a congressperson, but if you're Martha Stewart, look out, you're going to go to jail for a little while. How, in this new unregulated market, you can basically pull off the same thing, create a new currency. What's that like doing? That's like taking a new company and putting it on the stock market. Then you tell people about it and tell them why it's a great product. You make a white paper, like you said, and the white paper could be absolute garbage. It could say, we're just doing this for fun. And then, but that's what it is. And then everyone says, I like that. The same way that they say, I like Tesla or an NVIDIA or Apple, and they buy a bunch. And then the people who create it say, you know what? This company is just not doing what we thought it was going to do. We're going to go ahead and just sell all of our interest in it and take all of your money. And then we're going to go to Wyoming. And because, hey, I'm so sorry. The president, he's doing it too, right? So it's okay. And that's a very gray version of what the economic truth should be. Again, going back to that speech, it just signals to me we're going to stay swimming in the gray swamp. The gray swamp that was supposedly being promised to be drained. We'll be swimming in it for a while through at least the end of 2028. And like we said to our listeners, this is when you need to make that hay, because the government, the IRS, the tax man does not want to know. They fired them all, and they don't want to know because no one wants anyone to look at Jerome Powell or Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump Look at their hot wallets. No one wants anyone looking at that.
I can't wait to see the images of Donald Trump playing golf with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and that's when we'll know the top signal has arrived. When we get that image crossing our social media feeds, we'll know it's happened. Look, I think we got to pay attention going into September, October. I know it's, there's a couple of statewide elections.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be interesting collisions of forces, good and evil, dark and light. And some of these gubernatorial elections here in Virginia, it's an off-year election, and there is a Democratic candidate, and we're seeing some of this play out with the redistricting in California and Texas. And the fight for 2028 has begun. That's where I think stay focused and understanding that the rules are getting rewritten. The players have shifted dramatically in the last 12 months. The wild, wild west is now exactly. They don't want to know. The feds don't want to know. The IRS doesn't want to know. There is no, accurate Department of Labor statistics anymore. Jobs numbers don't matter. Sally and Freddie are going public. We'll let the market figure it out. The ultimate Polymarket, the public markets. We'll let them figure out what the interest rates should be. In the meantime, the Fed, is just a distraction. Nobody's talking about Epstein files, and Travis and Taylor are getting married before the Super Bowl arrives in February. So NFL season is here. Everyone will be kind of feeling all right, I think, while all of this mess plays out for power and money here in Washington.
Well said. And all I'll say is a last leave before we break is, even a dark Sith Lord can take off his helmet and suddenly become relatable again, and suddenly take a spot in Luke's trio of ghosts. There is the blurring of good and evil, and that example is one where we're going to see that even the villains become embraced by the Polymarket, by the public, and the good will be rebuffed, and then it will flip, and the villain will once again present themselves as such, and the good will rise again. I think right now, if we're looking at the pantheon of Star Wars movies, I feel like we're in the Empire Strikes Back kind of moments. And I feel like as we head towards 2028, we might be leaning into that Return of the Jedi moment. Sometimes you just got to train a little bit. You got to go to Dagobah. You got to learn some new tricks. You got to go to Wyoming. You got to learn some new fly casting styles. You got to come up with a new technique to approach the Empire. And I feel like we all have front row seats to how this is going to play. But I agree, September is going to be, I think, highly unexpected. I really do think it's going to be a month of a lot of twists and turns that are going to send markets down and up in ways that we haven't seen in a while. That's my prediction.
Keep your eye on changes to terms and conditions. That's an early indicator. We'll do it again next week.
Talk to you soon.
Peace.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Off the Record, On the Rocks. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next time for more news and all things crypto and Web3.